Hollywood's most successful filmmakers, has died. Harold Ramis starred in several comedy classics. He also wrote and directed some of Hollywood's funniest films.
Harold Ramis looked through the camera lens instead of the viewfinder on his first day as director. He pressed the red button and yelled, "Cut!" when the movie hadn't even started yet. This man had never directed a film. The studio had a backup director ready. And yet somehow, this chaos became one of the greatest comedies ever made. How did total anarchy become perfection on screen? Let's explore the story behind it and what everyone missed. The director who didn't know what he was doing. January 1979, Florida. Harold Ramis steps onto the set of his first film as director and makes a mistake no film student should make. He wasn't new to comedy. He had already made his name as a sharp writer on Animal House, shaping one of the most influential comedies of its era. But writing and directing are different worlds. On paper, he understood timing, structure, and punchlines. On set, everything moves at once. Actors, cameras, crew, pressure, and suddenly, theory doesn't help you breathe. 1. The amateur director's blunder. On day one, that gap showed immediately. Ramis walked onto the set, picked up the responsibility of directing, and leaned into the camera. Except he looked through the lens instead of the viewfinder. A small technical mistake, but in film language, it's the equivalent of steering a car while staring at the hood instead of the road. Then he called out, "Cut!" before anything meaningful had even started. The crew paused. The cast waited. And somewhere in the production office, studio executives started exchanging looks. This was not supposed to happen. 2. The secret execution list. The studio had already prepared a backup plan, a list of replacement directors ready in case the production collapsed early. That detail alone tells you how fragile the situation felt. A first-time director, a large comedy cast, and a budget that needed control. Not experiments, but control was already slipping. Part of the tension came from who Ramis was working with. The cast was stacked with strong personalities and improvisers who didn't always wait for instructions. Ted Knight's character drew inspiration from Groucho Marx's precise, fast-talking authority with a controlled chaos underneath. Bill Murray and Chevy Chase carried the unpredictable rhythm of Harpo and Chico-style energy, where jokes weren't just delivered, they were improvised, interrupted, and rebuilt in real time. Ramis was suddenly not just directing a film. He was managing competing comedic instincts that didn't naturally follow rules. And he didn't fight it in the way a seasoned director might. Instead of trying to dominate the set, Ramis stayed unusually restrained. While the cast went out at night, pushing boundaries and turning production breaks into full-blown parties, he kept his distance. He avoided the chaos off camera, choosing clarity over participation. That decision quietly shifted the power balance. He wasn't one of them socially, but he remained the anchor professionally. It created an unusual dynamic, uncontrolled energy on screen, controlled distance behind it. 3. The secret flipper sound leak. Even small production choices reflected this strange balance. One of the film's most iconic elements, the gopher wasn't even a real gopher sound. It was created using dolphin noises from Flipper, layered and modified into something that felt playful but slightly unreal. It shouldn't have worked. It wasn't technically correct, but it matched the tone of everything else happening. Slightly broken rules, producing unexpectedly perfect results. By the end of the first day, the studio wasn't calm. They were watching closely, ready to intervene if needed. But something unexpected was happening. The production wasn't collapsing. It was adapting. And Ramis, despite having no real directing experience, was learning in real time how to hold a system together that was actively resisting control. If the director was flying blind, What happened when the cast started improvising? And what happened when one actor's improvisation became so big that it stole the entire movie? The improvisation that became legendary. 4. The 6-day lead actor. Bill Murray showed up for 6 days. He was given 2 lines of stage direction. He walked away with one of the 100 greatest movie quotes of all time. Murray's involvement in the production was never designed to be central. He wasn't part of the full shoot schedule, and he didn't operate like a typical lead actor committed to months of coverage. He arrived late in the production cycle, filmed quickly, and left just as fast. In most films, that kind of limited presence would mean a minor role. Here, it became one of the defining forces of the entire movie. 5. The silent script deception. His character, Carl Spackler, was originally conceived as almost silent, a loose homage to Harpo Marx, where physical behavior and expression mattered more than dialogue. That idea alone already created space for unpredictability. But when Murray stepped into the role, he didn't treat silence as a limitation. He treated it as permission. 6. The accidental Cinderella masterpiece. One of the clearest examples of this shift came from the now legendary Cinderella story scene. On paper, there was almost nothing there. Just 2 lines of stage direction describe Carl cutting the tops off flowers with a grass whip. No monologue, no structure, no punchline written in advance. Murray ignored the absence of dialogue and filled the gap on his own. He created the entire speech in real time, a wandering, exaggerated fantasy about winning the Masters, framed through Carl's obsessive imagination. The rhythm wasn't planned, and the words weren't refined through multiple drafts. It was an immediate performance shaped in the moment, reacting to the space, the camera, and the absurdity of the character's mindset. That improvisation didn't just survive editing. It defined the scene. Decades later, it was still recognized as one of the most memorable comedic moments in American film, eventually earning a place among the AFI's greatest movie quotes. 7. The bitter late-night television feud. Behind the camera, the dynamic between Murray and Chevy Chase added another layer of unpredictability. Their tension wasn't manufactured for the film. It already existed from earlier conflicts in live television work, where strong personalities had clashed under pressure. On set, that history didn't disappear. It simmered underneath scenes that required them to share space, timing, and comedic rhythm. But even that conflict didn't break production. It fed it. Murray's approach to comedy leaned into disruption rather than structure. Where others followed blocking and timing, he bent scenes around instinct. That same instinct was visible in smaller moments too, like the Baby Ruth pool gag, a sequence rooted in an actual prank idea reportedly observed by Brian Doyle Murray. Something simple on paper became exaggerated into physical comedy that didn't rely on dialogue at all. What made all of this work was not planning. It was responsiveness. The film's structure was loose enough to absorb improvisation without collapsing. Instead of forcing actors into rigid delivery, the production allowed moments to expand if they found momentum. That flexibility created a strange result. The less control the script had, the more memorable certain scenes became. And Murray, even in a limited shooting window, became the clearest example of that principle. He didn't just perform within the film. He reshaped parts of it in real time, often without warning, turning minimal direction into fully formed sequences that outlived the original script's intent. The uncomfortable truth is that none of this was engineered. There was no guarantee the improvisation would work, no system ensuring consistency, no safety net if the jokes failed. It worked because it was unstable enough to breathe. And that raises a deeper question. Why does unscripted chaos sometimes produce better comedy than carefully constructed writing? When was the last time you heard a joke so good that you couldn't believe someone just made it up on the spot? That's what Murray did, but only because Ramis let him. But improvisation isn't just about comedy. Sometimes it's about power. And one actor on this set didn't just improvise, he demanded the script change around him. 8. The actor who rewrote the script with his mouth. Rodney Dangerfield didn't know when to start acting, so Harold Ramis stopped saying action. He just said, "Okay, Rodney, do your bit." Dangerfield arrived with something the production needed but couldn't control: instant credibility. The studio didn't just want a comedy, they wanted a name that could guarantee audiences. Dangerfield delivered that. But what came with him wasn't discipline or scripted precision. It was pure stand-up instinct, the kind of performance style built on timing, interruption, and reading a room rather than following a page. Very quickly, the normal rhythm of filmmaking started breaking down around him. Dangerfield didn't always wait for formal cues. He didn't operate like a traditional film actor who waits for action to trigger performance mode. Instead, he treated scenes like live comedy sets, fluid, reactive, always ready to shift. At some point early in production, Ramis adapted. Instead of calling action, he began simply saying, "Okay, Rodney, do your bit." That small change says everything about how far structure had already eroded. It wasn't just convenience, it was survival. The usual signals that keep a film set synchronized were no longer enough. Dangerfield's rhythm existed outside them, so the production bent around his timing instead of forcing him into theirs. Once that shift happened, it didn't reverse. Ramis never returned to the standard call for scenes involving him. What followed was a stream of improvised one-liners that rarely stayed in their original form. Dangerfield's comedy background meant he was used to building material in real time, reacting to energy rather than executing fixed dialogue. On set, that instinct carried directly into the film. Lines weren't just delivered, they were discovered mid-performance, often shaped by the reactions of other actors and the space itself. 9. The ghost dancing routine. One of the most memorable outcomes of that approach was his golf course dance sequence. It wasn't just blocking or choreography, it was performance instinct turned physical. The movement, timing, and exaggerated confidence all came from the same place as his stand-up persona. The ability to turn a simple moment into an exaggerated reaction that holds attention without needing explanation. And while Dangerfield was reshaping scenes through spontaneity, the contrast with other cast members became sharper. Ted Knight stood on the opposite end of the spectrum. He played his role with strict professionalism, treating every line and reaction as if it belonged to a tightly controlled stage performance. Where others bent or broke the structure, he held it steady. That tension mattered. Without someone resisting the chaos, the film would have lost its grounding completely. Knight's presence became the anchor, the straight line against a field of improvisation. But even with that anchor, the production never returned to full control. Dangerfield's influence ensured that unpredictability remained part of the process, not an exception to it. Scenes expanded beyond their written versions. Timing became flexible. Even pauses started carrying meaning that wasn't originally scripted. This created a strange production reality. The movie was still being written while it was being filmed, but not on paper, in performance. And that leads to the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire phase of production. Dangerfield didn't just support the film's structure, he actively weakened it. Yet that weakening is exactly what made his presence memorable. The structure didn't hold, it adapted. The film couldn't exist without his star power, but it also couldn't stay intact because of it. Every improvised moment added energy, but removed predictability. What emerged wasn't a tightly engineered comedy, but a system constantly adjusting to whoever was loudest in the room. Think about the last time you watched someone completely command a room without a script. That's Dangerfield, but it also meant the director lost control. If the cast was running wild and the script was falling apart, what happened when nature itself tried to shut the production down? 10. When a hurricane almost killed the movie. September 1979. A hurricane hit Florida. The crew scrambled. The equipment was underwater. The movie was supposed to be over. The storm didn't arrive as a warning. It hit like a hard stop. Florida's weather shifted fast, and what had already been a chaotic production suddenly turned into a survival situation for the shoot itself. Equipment cases filled with water. Outdoor setups collapsed. Entire shooting days disappeared in hours. For a production already balancing on instability, this should have been the moment everything finally broke. But it didn't end. The strange thing about this set was that even disaster didn't fully shut it down. The crew kept moving between damage control and improvisation. Scenes were delayed, reshuffled, or partially rebuilt around what was still usable. The environment stopped behaving like a controlled film location and started feeling more like a temporary camp, trying to finish a task under constant disruption. Behind the scenes, the tone reflected that same instability. Co-writer Douglas Kenney would later describe the production less like a structured film shoot and more like an extended party that occasionally stopped to film scenes. That description matters because it explains why even something as serious as a hurricane didn't instantly restore order. The system was already loose. The storm just exposed how loose it had become. 11. The unwatchable 4.5-hour monster. And yet, despite all of that, filming continued. When production finally had enough material to attempt an edit, the scale of the problem became clear. The first rough cut ran nearly 4.5 hours. That isn't a movie. It's fragments of a movie, still trying to decide what it is. Entire sequences are dragged without rhythm. Characters appeared and disappeared with no narrative discipline. The structure wasn't just long, it was unstable. At that point, the real work began, and it had nothing to do with shooting. Editing became a process of survival. Everything unnecessary had to be removed, even if it meant losing moments people liked on set. The film had to be reconstructed into something coherent, from a version that was never designed to hold together in the first place. This is where most productions would collapse, not during filming, but in the realization that the footage itself doesn't support a finished story. 12. The false emergency blast. But it slowly came together. Even post-production had its own near disasters. One of the final sequences, an explosive gag on the golf course, was so realistic in execution that it triggered panic on set. Harold Ramis, thinking something had gone wrong for real, called emergency services. Neighbors, hearing the blast, called the police. In that moment, fiction and reality blurred enough that even the director couldn't immediately tell the difference. Sound and music choices also went through turbulence. Early in development, the production had aimed high. Pink Floyd was considered for the soundtrack. That collaboration never materialized. The tone was too mismatched, or the timing didn't align. In their place, Kenny Loggins stepped in, delivering "I'm All Right," a track that ended up becoming inseparable from the film's identity. By the time the film reached completion, the financial picture was just as surprising as the production story. With a budget of around $6 million, it went on to earn nearly $40 million at the box office. On paper, that's a 6.6 times return. In reality, it was something more unusual. A film that should not have stabilized, somehow becoming a commercial success. Everything about production was unstable. Weather, structure, editing, and even sound direction. At multiple points, the film was one decision away from being unreleasable, yet it survived every failure point. But while the hurricane and chaos were happening, something darker was going on behind the scenes. something the cast never talked about until years later. 13. The coercion and tragedy behind the comedy. Cindy Morgan was a Chicago DJ before acting.
There were scenes outside of Chevy's house, in and around Chevy's house, a lot of that stuff that we shot.
She thought she was auditioning for a comedy. She didn't know the producer had already planned her nude scene and would threaten her career if she refused. Morgan entered Caddyshack expecting a standard path into film comedy. Instead, she found herself in a production environment where creative decisions were already locked in by power rather than collaboration. According to her accounts, producer John Peters had predetermined that a topless scene would be part of her role. The issue wasn't discussion or negotiation, it was enforcement. 14. The psychological playset trap. She was allegedly told that refusal would end her career in Hollywood. That kind of statement doesn't operate in the normal direction. It operates like leverage. At one point, she was also led to believe a Playboy photographer might be present on set, reinforcing the pressure surrounding the scene. That plan ultimately never happened, but the psychological weight of the situation remained. Morgan eventually communicated the situation to Harold Ramis. From there, she agreed to proceed after being informed of the stakes involved. This moment sits in the film's history as one of its most uncomfortable production realities, not because it is visible in the final cut, but because of the conditions under which consent was negotiated. 15. The tragic disappearance of Sarah Holcomb. Elsewhere in the cast, another story reflects a different kind of fallout. Sarah Holcomb, who appeared in both Animal House and Caddyshack, briefly existed at the center of two major comedy successes before disappearing from Hollywood entirely. Between 1978 and 1980, she acted in only 4 films before stepping away from the industry. Her exit was not framed as a strategic career move. It was followed by accounts of substance abuse and severe mental health struggles that removed her from public life. Co-writer Chris Miller described her situation bluntly, pointing to heavy substance use and the influence of destructive environments. By the time the films became cultural landmarks, she was no longer part of the industry that had briefly elevated her. These two trajectories sit uncomfortably inside the same production legacy, one shaped by coercive pressure, the other by personal collapse. In both cases, the film continued forward without pause. At release, critics largely rejected the film, describing its humor as uneven and often crude, leaning heavily into physical and scatological jokes. The critical response was dismissive, but audiences responded differently. They didn't engage with the film as a polished structure. They responded to its unpredictability, energy, and irreverence. Over time, that gap between critical dismissal and audience attachment turned the film into a lasting cultural reference point. What emerges from the full production story is not a clean creative success, but a layered contradiction. A film that achieved iconic status while carrying within it stories of instability, coercion, and personal damage that were never part of its marketing or myth. What looked like a comedy classic was built on chaos, improvisation, and damage behind the scenes. From control lost to lives changed, the laughter came at a cost we rarely talk about. Which truth changed how you see it?